The persons in this video are real, however, their names and appearance have been changed to protect their identity.
Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is George Schlacek. I am
the one and only.
And in this series I tell you all about the tour that originally got me hooked on bicycle touring. The entire tour is recorded in my book, Destinations Are Fake. And there's a link in the description so that you can easily order your copy. And I thank you for that. Enough of that. In the last episode, I was telling you all about camping, but prior to that, I was in Louisiana. I ended up in Cameron in a motel, drenched, had to dry off. If you missed that part, it's Bicycle Touring Talk episode 15. So today I'm going to tell you how I got into the state of Texas and my first impressions and everything. The following day started with the ferry ride just west of there, which was followed by a long straight ride on a coastal highway. It was against the wind, so it was quite tough, and it seemed longer than it actually was. It was early afternoon when I finally crossed the bridge into Port Arthur, Texas. On the other side was a big old general store that was so much more than just a store. There was also a restaurant. And since I was really hungry from the ride, I decided to have a big burger there. Burgers are bigger in Texas. This one was not just big, but also very delicious. The waitress at the restaurant took interest in my tour and informed me that I would not have been able to use the bridge across the state line just a few weeks prior.
They just opened up the bridge again.
My waitress hummed as she topped up my coffee.
There was no way to get across here for a while, after Hurricane Rita.
The restaurant was not very busy this Sunday afternoon, so the waitress came around to ask me about the highlights of my tour, and by this day I had quite a few stories to tell, like the moonlight ride in Florida, my adventure on the bridge in New Orleans, and of course camping under the antenna tower near Grand Chenier. The young lady took keen interest in my tour, and I probably made her day, even if just by providing entertainment on a really slow Sunday at work. An hour and a half or so later, I was finally back out on the road, trying to find my way toward Beaumont, where I had arranged accommodation through Couchsurfing. My host was actually a lady I had met on a photo sharing site, so I was somewhat acquainted with her. The landscape of Port Arthur was quite different from anything I had experienced so far on my tour. For the first time since the beginning of my trip, the terrain was what can be described only as ugly. Huge refineries and other industrial installations were dominating. I managed to get disoriented at a four-way intersection. My poor sense of orientation, along with a not-so-good map of Texas, had me turn the wrong way, only to waste time. All I saw was more refineries, employee parking lots. When I realized that I had to turn around, the sun was setting and lighting up the sky with shades of blue and orange that made the area look quite surreal. I felt that I was in a bit of trouble. It was clear that I wasn't going to make it to Beaumont before dark. There was no shoulder on the two-lane highway, so I was riding in the same lane as the cars and trucks, putting me at greater and greater risk the darker it got. Thankfully, traffic was light, but the ride in the fading light did not feel safe. By the time I finally entered the city of Beaumont, it was pitch black. Now I had to go find a phone booth to try and get a hold of Kelly, my Couchsurfing host. It took a few tries to get a hold of Kelly, and when she finally answered the phone, she told me that she was rather careful about who she would take into her house via Couchsurfing, and instead of giving me directions to her place, she suggested we'd first meet in a public place. It seemed like everything was shut down in this part of Beaumont, even though it was only 8 o'clock at night. But Kelly gave me directions to an ice cream parlor. When I got there, it looked abandoned, but it was open, I ended up waiting in the empty parking lot, wondering how long it would be, wondering if I had found the right place. Finally, a car pulled up. I noticed a couple inside and figured they had to be someone else. But the driver pulled right up to me, lowered his window, and introduced himself as Ben. My first impression was that Ben was Kelly's boyfriend. A brief chat revealed that he was also a couch surfer who was in Beaumont on business. His company had provided him with a rental car and a hotel room. He was using the couch surfing site just to hook up with friends. Kelly, who was in the passenger seat, was one of them. The two had already made plans to get together with yet another lady they had met on couch surfing, and Kelly explained to me that I was welcome to join them if I wanted. But first I had to follow Ben's car with my bicycle through a dark neighborhood, and we finally ended up at this older duplex, which was where Kelly lived. Once inside, she wasted no time showing me her big old couch, and she asked me if I needed a shower before going anywhere, and I said, yeah, that would be nice. See, I had just spent the better part of the day on a dusty highway. When I told her that, she looked at me and said, well, are you too tired to go out? And I said, no, let's do this. A short while later, Ben drove us to a 24-hour supermarket. We need ice cream, Kelly explained to me. Then we're going to visit my friend Liz, who is also a couch surfer. Liz has some wicked beer in her fridge and she's gonna share it with us. Here I was, just in from a long and lonely ride on the Louisiana and Texas highways, and this was a total change in scenery and it was quite welcome. I had already found, through couch surfing, awesome people. Of course, it was a welcome change. During our get-together, we talked about our adventures with travel and more specifically couch surfing. Till the wee hours of the morning. Kelly was the only Beaumont local in the group. Ben was from Nevada, but had traveled the world as an engineer. His stay in Beaumont was only a few days long. He would be on his way to Korea the same time the following day. Liz was a reporter with a local newspaper who had moved here from Ohio after spending some time unemployed and eventually becoming homeless. Couch surfing had been her way back from rough times, and Kelly had hosted her for her first few weeks in Texas. For a change, I wasn't the only one with a good travel story. By the time we parted, we had become good friends, even though we had just met. I spent the entire next day in Beaumont checking out a few tourist attractions, including the museum Kelly worked at, and the world's second biggest fire hydrant. In the evening, I took Kelly to her favorite Mexican restaurant for supper. The next stage of my trip was again over 100 kilometers. The ride to Houston on US Highway 90 was somewhat long and boring, and it was made even tougher by occasionally very strong headwinds. On the previous evening in Beaumont, I had searched the internet for possible accommodation. I had found a host, her name was Carol, on warmshowers.org, but by the time I reached the outskirts of Houston, it was again getting dark. I had picked up a map that highlighted the way to Carol's house, but that didn't prevent me from getting lost in a maze of industrial parks. Eventually, I found a rundown convenience store, so I decided to go and get a snack and ask the clerk inside if I was on the right track. This was how I found out that I was in a Spanish-speaking part of town, because the clerk was not really willing to answer my questions in English.
No hablo inglés, solo español.
He gave me a chuckle though when I explained to him in my broken Spanish that I was on my way to Mexico on my bicycle. Now I had his attention. This broke the ice and I was able to get some information out of him, and we communicated quite well in Spanglish. The guy turned out to be quite friendly in the end. On my way out, he actually gave me the thumbs up and yelled, "Viva Mexico!" My adventures of the day weren't quite over yet. I still managed to get disoriented and riding through city, much of it on the sidewalk because the streets were busy with cars and I didn't feel safe. In the end, I decided I have to get reoriented, and I noticed, well, my map was gone. I had lost it from the back of my bike. Now I had to dig out my notebook where I had originally written down directions to Carol's place. I decided to call her, and when I finally got a hold of her, she confirmed that I wasn't very far from her place at all. Relief. Carol was also a cycling enthusiast who had her perfectly clean, high-end touring bike on display in her living room. She told me that for her, bicycle touring was a way of life and that she would tour whenever time allowed it. She had been to many parts of the United States, most notably the Colorado Rockies. Most of her tours had been group adventures, but she wasn't afraid of riding by herself. Unfortunately, I only got to spend one short evening with Carol. We were both tired, me from the long ride. Carol had to get up early for work the next day. As it turned out, getting out of Houston the next day wasn't nearly as hard as finding my way in. It was only a short ride and I was back on US Highway 35, now going south for the first time since I was in Florida. A look on my Texas map revealed that I was going to be at the Mexican border in only a few short days. The journey through the rest of Texas was quite uneventful. The highlights were a stay overnight at the Goose Island State Park near Aransas. The camping there cost significantly less than at comparable park in other states like Florida. And the park had a boardwalk and a beach area. It was beautiful. There was also a really nice sunset that evening. I also spent a grueling day finding my way through the industrial areas of Corpus Christi. Instead of heading for famous Padre Island, I decided to go west to Robstown and then south on Route 77 to Kingsville and eventually Robertsville on a perfectly flat and straight highway, all the way against a strong wind. That slowed me down to a crawl. Once I arrived in Robertsville, I spent another night in a cheap motel. It was also in Robertsville where I almost changed my mind about going to Mexico. I was on the internet searching about information, and what I came up with were crime scene pictures, stuff that had happened just in recent days. It really gave me a shudder. This was late 2009. There was a lot of bad stuff going on in the border region of Mexico. Those crime scene pictures were still fresh on my mind when I went out to a convenience store to get some beer, and I ended up talking to two guys outside in the parking lot. They both seemed to be Mexican, and they actually told me that yes, we were both born there, and as kids we used to go there all the time with family. But today, man, there's shootouts every day down there, man. Why would you go to Mexico on your bicycle by yourself? I grew up there, I speak the language, but I won't go there anymore. It's just not worth it. The other guy was nodding the whole time. After returning to my motel, I couldn't sleep. Mexico was the country I had come to discover. Nothing was going to make me turn around. I found that I was quite determined, or perhaps stubborn, but part of me was also very afraid. After some debating with myself, just in my head, that tends to happen when you're going on a long bicycle tour, I finally fell asleep in the wee hours of the morning. When I woke up again, my concerns were of a totally different nature. More rain was on the way, but mostly my rear tire on my bicycle was flat. So once again, I had to patch a tire first thing in the morning in the comfort of my hotel room. That day would have been my last day in Texas, but the rain outside was so heavy that I decided on the internet to look for a host in Brownsville, which was only a short ride away. Actually, at one point the rain got so heavy that I considered taking another night at the motel, but there was really nothing to do. So riding to Brownsville, even if it meant getting a little bit wet, seemed like the better option. Once on the road, the ride was pretty steady and the rain had let up. I made it to the outskirts of Brownsville when I noticed that my rear tire was flat yet again. When I finally arrived at what had to be Simon's house, my couchsurfing host, I was pushing the bike. Don't ring the doorbell, he had told me over the couchsurfing website, so I knocked on the door. After a few minutes, a clean-cut man who appeared to be in his mid-30s opened the door. "Hey dude, you made it," he greeted me. "Come bring your stuff and we'll put your bike in the garage." I started taking off my panniers and he carried them into the house. Next, I was presented with a long list of rules. It went from where to turn on the lights and making sure that the door is always locked and there was a security chain in place. I wasn't really too impressed, to be honest. But, you know, with the rain still coming down outside, I figured I was grateful for having a place that was dry. I also had to worry about my tire. I really couldn't afford to be picky at that point. The uneasy feeling went away after talking to Simon a bit more. It turned out he was a retired soldier, and of course I wasn't going to judge a guy who had been in Iraq and through several tours of combat. He turned out to be a really nice guy. I definitely liked Simon as a person. When I told Simon about the flat tire on my bike, he replied that, well, I gotta get my tandem serviced. He had a tandem bike in his garage, and we can go to the bike dealer tomorrow and you can pick up a new tube and get the tire checked if you want. So he was very helpful in that way. Later in the day, when the rain subsided, we took a ride through Brownsville together. He let me use his cruiser bike, which was quite a change for me, but it was fun. Due to the amount of water on the roads and my flat tire, I ended up staying with Simon an extra night. And I also got to meet his girlfriend and his son. The second day, we went all over town for shopping. I picked up a spare tube, some iodine tablets to purify the water, because in Mexico the water wasn't supposed to be safe for drinking. And Simon told me all about what he knew about Mexico, and it didn't sound nearly as scary as what those two guys in Robertsville at the convenience store had told me. However, it was mainly corrupt police and unsafe drinking water that kept him away from Mexico as well, at least most of the time. Well, my friends, the time had come for me to take the step into the unknown and cross the Mexican border. I will tell you all about how that went and my first impressions about Mexico in my next episode. Until then, you might want to catch up on some of my previous videos, and you might want to consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. See you next time.